Hi everyone, I've got Dr. Ffion Thompson with me today. She's a postdoctoral researcher in youth athletic development at Leeds Beckett University. Hi Ffion.
Hi
We've
guys.
been doing a little bit of work with Leeds Beckett, and Fion's very kindly shared some of our research that we've already put on our website. But what we particularly like to talk about today, Ffion, was your work with student athletes and what your research has found and how you think that could be good advice for directors of sport.
No, sounds good. I'm excited to talk about it.
So what just outline, what were the main findings of your research on the student athlete?
I think well, it's first kind of set up that we looked at the student athletes from like a holistic point of view. I think one of the important aspects and to think about when you're working with student athletes is, whatever happens in the academic field will also affect the athletics field, as well as what's happening psychosocially or psychologically. It all interacts and all correlates and impacts each other. And that kind of got us looking at the student athlete from this holistic point. So athletically, physically, psychosocially, and psychologically, and how they intercorrelate and affect each other. And I think one of the things is just to notify the demands that these student athletes go under. It's they've got a high academic workload, so the same workload that every other student has within the academic, but then they also have the addition of the physical demands. So about 8 to 10 hours potentially of school training, 1 to 2 competitions a week. And then on top of that, we need to also be aware of the external work and external workload that they're doing outside of the school. So, potentially another 2 to 3 hours more of training outside of school and one other competition. And I think that's a really important aspect that a lot of directors of sport and people working with student athletes forget about. They look at what the kid is doing within the school, but they forget actually all the extra, the external stuff that they're doing outside. And I think also a really important finding was 70% of these student athletes have expressed that they had a dual identity. So they have equal motivations towards academic and sporting pursuits. So as a school as well, we need to provide that avenue and that protection for both of those areas. And then we also looked at around looking at your school year as transitional. So we need to look at the beginning of the school year and the impact that has, and when kids come back from summer or if they're new into the school. And then you've got to think about then what happens through the school. And generally then that will impact the long-term impact. So we're not so worried about that, because if you get and address what happens at the beginning and what happens throughout the school, the long-term impacts kind of deal with themselves and actually will end up being more positive. So I think that's a way as well. We're kind of looking at that beginning of the year and what that's like for student athletes and as they come back and transition to school, and then what it looks like as you go across the school year in terms of the data that we found.
Because that time management must be really important, because there's always the student who will leave things to the last minute. And obviously, if you are a student athlete with all those commitments, the way you plan your time, even over that 2-year period of your A levels particularly, is important, isn't it? Have you got any advice around how directors of sport can help the students manage that time?
Yeah, so one of the really interesting findings that we found is obviously combining sport and education is demanding, and actually that's something that probably we can't avoid. That is the reality of being a student athlete, and we actually have to accept that they're going to have high academic demands and they are going to have high physical demands, and we can look at our schedule and monitor that, so then peak periods of academic stress aren't at the same time as peak times of physical stress. So there are manipulations, but it is going to be demanding, and that's the reality of being a student athlete. But I also think we presume athletes have these skills, and one of the things that student athletes said, and I think one of the things that's really important to stress about this research, it actually is the athlete's voice, the student athlete's voice within this. It's not the staff thing that said this, is actually putting the student athlete's voice to fruition. Like the kids were doing log diaries, the kids are filling out questionnaires, so it's actually how they're feeling. And I think that's really important to consider. So we might think people are feeling a certain way, but this is actually what the student athletes were feeling. And one of the things is they felt that they knew they had to manage their time. They knew that was really important, but they just didn't know how. And I think that's a really important thing to understand. And as a director of sport, is we can't just expect that these kids have these skills, and we need to actually educate them on strategies, on development things. And that actually leads on to one of the projects that we're doing now. So at Leeds Beckett, we've just developed a dual career development program. And one of the things around upskilling student athletes with key competencies that we know are beneficial to manage a dual career of sport and academics. And one of that is around time management workshops. to actually doing a session with the athletes on time management and skills, and actually giving them tools. Because I think, again, it's go manage your time better, but actually just giving them tools on how they do that. So we, as part of that workshop, we get them looking at long-term planning, we get them looking at sheets, we get them looking at prioritizing expectations. We look around how they can work effectively, because that's another thing is kids these days unfortunately don't work effectively in the time they have, and that's really important for student athletes. So it's actually how can they create a more effective working environment, and those tips and tools and things like that. And I think that's a massive thing to think about within your program, is we need to actually provide the skills and upskill our athletes to help those programs. And that's something at Leeds Beckett that we're now developing a program for. So if any director of sports want access or want to know more about that, please do get in touch.
So it's important. We're mentors to these students, aren't we? And we do have to educate. And actually, when you were talking about some of those skills, I was reflecting that actually they're life skills, aren't they? They're not just ones that they're going to use when they're at school. They are skills that they're going to leave school with and use in their everyday life.
100%. I think, and that's the aim. I think as our aim should be, regardless if an athlete makes it or not, they've had a positive development experience. And I think that's what we've got to think about. And that's what a dual career kind of provides. And that's when also looking at that holistic point of view. If we can develop the whole person, and again, we provide them with the opportunities, because I think advocating for, sport and academics is really important for those kids who want to do it. And so, but it's providing that opportunity and protecting them, that if they don't make it, they also still have all these other skills that are important for life. And I think that's kind of the approach that we go. It's like, if they make it, great, but if they don't, we have given them X, Y, Z skills, and that's all that matters. We know they're able to have lifelong participation in physical activity. They have the life skills that we know you learn from being a dual career athlete that are important for business meetings or any other job that they go on to. They've been able to get a scholarship to America that then they go and find a pursuit in marketing that they really enjoy. And I think that's where we've got to understand is we're there to see that whole person and their journey afterwards, and whatever journey that is, as long as it's positive, then we've done our job in a good way. And I think a part of that, and I think one of the really interesting things about our findings is we talk about this holistic point of view in terms of the athlete, but I also think it's really important when you're looking at your departments that you're also not isolating. So we are saying athletic, academic, psychosocial, and psychological can't be individual elements. They all interact and correlate and affect each other. And I think that's the same within schools, that different departments will affect each other. So you can't have the sports department working separately to the academic department. You can't have the academic department and sport working separately to the boarding. Actually, to help these student athletes, that has to have a better collaboration, and they have to be talking. So, for example, if an athlete's missing a lot of school, the coaches need to be talking to the academic staff, making them aware that these, because everyone wants to support the athlete, but often it's just not the conversations happening for them to best support, and they don't know. So the amount of times we see academic staff being like, I just didn't know they were going away. So I couldn't have planned and helped them. It's not that they don't want to help them, they're just not aware. And I think that's the same with boarding staff around, they're the kind of the father figures or the mother figures, away from schools if they're in boarding, and they also need to be aware, like, look, we're going through, so they might know that there might be more stress, so they'll provide more social support. And I think that's a really thing, as well as like an integrated school department is what's going to work most effectively to help these student athletes.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the time the director of sport has got to take the lead on that, and collaboration is a skill. And so you're right, we're learning that as well, because we've got to work with academic staff and boarding staff, because if we want that student to get the best out of their time at school, if we don't take that proactive step, it could easily just slip through the net, couldn't it?
Yeah, and 100%. It's one of those, I think those who have seen my research would have seen this graph around like the oscillations in academic and physical stress. And one of the things is actually the peak academic, assessment periods are peaking at the same time as some of the high physical workload weeks. And that's just because they haven't communicated or haven't had an awareness of, because I think we know that those kids are more stressed in academics that week. So that is a week potentially as a sporting department to have a deload week, to have a tapering week, because we actually know that if we need to have that fluctuation in training load. And some of the other work I put around to schools as well is around training load management and that side of things. And part of that is actually having periodization and tapering, and we need to have that for the kids to actually have some physical visualization. But that's a perfect time to partner that with an assessment week. And
Yeah.
I think it's just an awareness of what that athlete is doing. And that also comes to the extracurricular activities. So, a lot of schools now are doing dance programs, dance shows. So again, if you know the dance show week's on and you've got, a load of your athletes involved in the dance show or the school production or the music, then again, that athlete, and I think it also comes down to this one size fits all approach, doesn't work when we're looking at student athletes because every individual demands are different. So you'll have a kid who's in the school play, you'll have a kid that's not. That demands are different in terms of their week. And I think we also need to go away from being like, this is our program, our team is doing this, to actually, okay, what is best for that individual? And that, it might not be best for that individual to train today, but that's for the best of the team in the long term because they're also doing external sport outside or they're doing this. And I think that's also a really important message is for directors of sports to kind of talk with their departments about being more flexible on the individual level and around how that works best for that individual with the multiple demands that they have.
Yeah. You're managing the training load management document I've also uploaded to the website, so directors of sport can see that. And I think for me, there the number of times you've mentioned the whole person, and I think as educationalists, that is our primary aim, isn't it, to send students away from school as good people who have these skills that, as you say, they might use in sport, but they're going to use in lots and lots of other, walks of life. So that's brilliant stuff, Ffion. Just before you go, let's just give a quick plug for your long-term athlete development conference on the 14th of June up at Leeds Beckett. John, just give us a little bit about what you're going to be covering, some of this, and what else?
Yeah, so aim of our conference is to bring kind of leading practitioners and researchers, some of the leading kind of researchers in the country around long-term athletics, but how that applies to school settings in particular. I think one of the major things is bridging the gap between research and practice. So we want it to be very much a practice-informed conference so that you guys can go away back into your practice with some key information around PE, athletic and physical development, nutrition, psychology. So we want to cover multiple areas that affect long-term athletic development as well. So it's definitely a conference for everyone. It's not just, the director of sports or the PE. We're trying to cater for everyone within this conference for everyone that's in. And I think a challenge for you guys as director of sports is to bring some of your colleagues along with you and how they can benefit and learn from some stuff. And also an opportunity to connect, network, connect, discussion forums and stuff is all going to be part of that conference.
Yeah, we were talking, and I love your idea about bringing someone, because as a director of sport, there are so many of your staff that could benefit from this program. I've seen what's on the program; it looks brilliant, and I think it's only £30. So hopefully, we get lots of people there in June. Anyway, Ffion, thanks very much for your time. Really, really appreciate it, and hopefully, lots of us will see you again at the conference in June. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me along, and get in touch anyone if you want to discuss anything further.
Thanks, Ffion.